It started with a $500 fine and a painting no one could see. At 14B Juniper Lane, nestled in the pristine order of Maple Creek Estates, Anya Sharma, a decorated Army veteran with 2 tours and enough medals to make a coffee table shine, was being fined for a mural painted on a backyard wall that faced nothing but trees. The offense? Unauthorized alteration of exterior surfaces, according to the HOA. Never mind that it was her wall, her yard, her trauma. In Iraq, Anya had survived mortar fire, ambushes, and the searing heat of combat. In Maple Creek, she was fighting beige paint chips and a woman named Brenda Min, whose greatest battlefield was the HOA handbook. She thought she had left the war behind. But wars have a way of following you home, especially when the enemy is armed with bylaws and a clipboard. What happened next would turn the quiet neighborhood upside down and force everyone to ask what really matters: uniformity or understanding. For anyone else, it was a momentary annoyance. For Anya, the sound was a key, unlocking a door she fought daily to keep bolted shut. The scent of lemon vanished, replaced by the phantom smell of diesel and hot, dusty air. The gleaming granite beneath her hands felt like the hot metal skin of a Humvee. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the sudden, roaring silence in her ears. She was back there, in the dust and the heat, the brilliant, unforgiving sun beating down on a world that had shrunk to the narrow alley, the shouting, the chaos, the one sound that had preceded the world turning upside down. Her breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the edge of the counter. Breathe, Sharma. Just breathe. You are in your kitchen. You are in Maple Creek. You are safe. The words were a mantra, a rope she threw to her present self, pulling her back from the precipice of memory. Slowly, the roaring in her ears subsided. The phantom smells faded. She was left shaking, a fine tremor running through her arms, drenched in a cold sweat. This was her life, a series of ambushes laid by her own mind. Her therapist, a kind, patient man at the VA, had been encouraging her to find an outlet, a way to externalize the narrative, as he put it. "You can't keep it bottled up, Anya," he'd said last week. "It's corrosive. Find a language that doesn't require words." She'd dismissed it at the time. Words were the problem, sure, but what other language was there? Later that afternoon, staring out her back window, she found her answer. The backyard was her one concession to mild disorder. A few flourishing tomato plants, a stubborn patch of clover in the grass, and the wall. The back wall of her property was a long, unlovely stretch of gray cinder block, about 8 feet high, separating her yard from a dense, undeveloped patch of woods. It was a blank canvas, a void. It was exactly how she felt inside. An idea, quiet and insistent, began to form. What if she could take the chaos inside her head and put it there, on the wall? What if she could take the tangled, screaming mess of memories and give them form and color, wrestling them into submission on that ugly gray surface? It was a crazy thought. It was also the first thing in years that felt like hope. The next day, Anya was at the hardware store. She moved through the paint aisle with the focus of a soldier on a mission. She didn't choose the muted, HOA-approved beiges and grays that filled the shelves. Her hands went to the colors of her memory. A deep, bruised purple, the color of a pre-dawn sky over a hostile landscape. A jarring, violent red, the color of emergency and fear. A stark, consuming black, and, after a moment's hesitation, a sliver of brilliant metallic gold for reasons she couldn't yet articulate. She didn't consult the Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association handbook. The wall was in her backyard, facing the woods. It was, she reasoned, her own private space, her own private battle. For the next week, the wall was her world. Every afternoon, after the morning's nervous energy had subsided, she would go outside, put on her old, paint-splattered coveralls, and work. She didn't sketch or plan. She let instinct guide her brush. The work was physically demanding, stretching and reaching, her muscles aching in a way that felt clean and honest. She began with the black, a great chaotic swirl in the center, a vortex that seemed to pull everything into it. Then came the purple, bleeding out from the edges, vast and lonely. She attacked the canvas with the red slashing strokes, like open wounds across the surface. It was ugly, it was raw, it was honest, and, for the first time since she'd come home, Anya felt a flicker of that elusive peace. Out here, with the scrape of the brush on the rough cinder block and the smell of latex paint in the air, the ghosts were quieter. They weren't gone, but they were on the wall, not in her head. She was so absorbed in her work that she barely noticed her neighbor, a retired Army colonel named Howard, watching her from his deck from time to time, a curious, thoughtful expression on his face. She was so focused that she didn't think twice about the crisp, white envelope that appeared in her taupe mailbox one Tuesday afternoon. She opened it in the kitchen, her fortress of control. It was from the Maple Creek HOA. Her eyes scanned the professionally printed lines, the blood draining from her face. A violation of Bylaw Section 7, Clause 4, unauthorized alteration of exterior surfaces, a significant deviation from the community's approved aesthetic standards. A fine of $500, 500 hours, is hereby levied. You have 14 days from the date of this letter to remediate the violation by painting the surface back to the original approved color, desert sand beige. Failure to comply will result in further fines and potential legal action. The letter was signed by one Brenda Min, HOA president. The paper trembled in Anya's hand. Her breath hitched. They hadn't seen a therapeutic process. They hadn't seen a desperate attempt to heal. They had seen a deviation from aesthetic standards. They had taken her battlefield, her sanctuary, her one glimmer of hope, and slapped a price tag and a deadline on it. The carefully constructed fortress of her silence didn't just crack, it shattered. The ghosts came rushing back in, and this time they weren't just whispering, they were screaming. The HOA meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a building that oozed the same sterile pleasantness as the rest of Maple Creek. The air smelled faintly of air freshener and old coffee. Anya sat in a folding chair at the back, her hands clenched so tightly in her lap her knuckles were white. She felt exposed, a specimen under a microscope. Around 10 other residents were scattered throughout the room, their faces a mixture of boredom and mild curiosity. At the front, behind a long folding table, sat the HOA board, a tired-looking accountant, a woman who seemed surgically attached to her smartphone, and, in the center, Brenda Min. Brenda was the living embodiment of Maple Creek's ethos. Her hair was a perfect, immovable helmet of blonde. Her blazer was crisply pressed. Her smile was bright, fixed, and offered no warmth whatsoever. She ran the meeting with an efficiency that bordered on aggressive, moving through minutes and budget reports with brisk, no-nonsense finality. Next on the agenda, Brenda announced, her voice sharp and clear, is the violation at 14B Juniper Lane. She didn't look at Anya. She looked at a paper in front of her. The board has reviewed the case. The bylaws are quite clear. Section 7, Clause 4. An unauthorized alteration was made. A fine was issued and a remediation notice was sent. Are there any questions? Silence. Anya felt her heart pound. This was her chance. She had rehearsed it in her head 100 times. Just explain. Make them understand. She stood up, her legs feeling unsteady. I'm Anya Sharma from 14B. Brenda finally turned her gaze on her. It was like being pinned by an insect collector. Yes, we're aware. I wanted to explain. Anya began, her voice barely a whisper. She cleared her throat. The wall, the painting, it's a personal project. It's important to me. The words felt clumsy, inadequate. How could she possibly explain the roaring silence, the smell of diesel fuel, the frantic beat of a heart expecting the world to end? It's a kind of therapy. Brenda's polite smile didn't waver. Ms. Sharma, while we can all appreciate personal projects, the purpose of an HOA is to protect the collective investment of all homeowners. That means maintaining a consistent and pleasing aesthetic. What one person finds therapeutic, another might find— She paused, searching for the right word. Distressing. It's precisely to avoid these subjective conflicts that we have objective rules. The bylaws exist for the good of the entire community. But no one can even see it, Anya protested, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. It faces the woods. It doesn't affect anyone. That's not accurate, Brenda countered smoothly. The undeveloped land is slated for a future walking trail as part of Phase 2 of the community development. The wall will be highly visible. Furthermore, allowing one exception opens the door for countless others. What if your neighbor decides his therapy is a collection of old tires, or another wants to paint their house purple? Where does it end? A man in the front row chuckled. Anya felt a hot flush of shame creep up her neck. She was being mocked, dismissed as a child who didn't understand the rules. She tried to speak again, to say something about her service, about the VA, but the words caught in her throat. The trauma that fueled the mural was the very thing that now silenced her. The board's decision stands, Brenda said, a note of finality in her voice that slammed the door on any further discussion. The fine is upheld. You have, she consulted her paper again, 11 days left to comply. Next item. Anya sank back into her chair, defeated. The world had narrowed to the smug set of Brenda Min's jaw and the condescending smiles of the board. She had faced down armed insurgents with more composure. She fled the clubhouse as soon as the meeting was adjourned, not seeing the thoughtful, concerned gaze of Colonel Howard following her out the door. She spent the next day in a fog of despair. The wall, once a source of release, now seemed to mock her. The angry red slashes felt like her own failure. The deep, lonely purple felt like her future. She was going to have to paint over it, cover up the one honest thing she had created, smothering it in a bland coat of desert sand beige. It felt like a surrender. It felt like dying. That evening, as the sun began to set, her doorbell rang. It was Colonel Howard. his face creased with the gentle wrinkles of a man in his 70s who had smiled more than he'd frowned. He held a plate covered in aluminum foil. "My wife made too much pot roast," he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble. "Figured you could use some." Anya stared at him, speechless. "Oh, you don't have to." "Nonsense. I saw you at the meeting last night," he said, stepping past the threshold as she numbly held the door open. "That was a tough room." He glanced around her immaculate living room, his eyes taking in the rigid order. He'd seen homes like this before, on military bases, homes where everything was squared away on the outside because everything was chaos on the inside. "They just don't understand," Anya mumbled, setting the heavy plate on her coffee table. "No, they don't," he agreed. He didn't press or pry. He just stood there, a quiet, reassuring presence. He looked at her, his eyes full of a knowing sympathy that was more comforting than any words of pity. "I was in the Corps, 68 to 71, K-San." He didn't need to say anything more. Anya understood. He was one of them. He got it. "I spent a year trying to get the noise out of my head," he said softly. "My wife almost left me. I took up woodworking, made a god-awful mess in the garage for months, but it was either make a mess of the wood or make a mess of my life." He finally looked towards her backyard. "That wall of yours, that's your woodworking, isn't it?" Tears pricked Anya's eyes. She nodded, unable to speak. He was quiet for a long moment. "Brenda Min is a field marshal of trivial infractions," he said with a wry smile. "But she's meticulous. She lives and dies by the book, which means," he leaned in slightly, "the book is also her weakness." He pulled a thin, bound copy of the Maple Creek Estates bylaws from his back pocket, already dog-eared and marked with little sticky tabs. He flipped to a page. "I did a little reading after the meeting," he said. "Section 7 is about permanent architectural changes, but over here, Section 12, Clause 2, it allows for the placement of temporary, non-permanent displays, including seasonal and holiday decorations, provided the board is notified. The definition of temporary is, and I quote, not to exceed 90 days. Anya stared at him, then at the book. A tiny spark flickered to life in the cold emptiness of her despair. "It's not a permanent alteration, Anya," the colonel said, his eyes twinkling. "It's a temporary art installation. You just have to frame it that way." He tapped the book. "You can't fight Brenda on her terms. She'll bury you in beige paint and legalese. You have to change the terms. Don't ask for an exception. Announce an exhibition." The colonel's words were a lifeline. Announce an exhibition. The idea was audacious, terrifying, and utterly brilliant. It shifted the narrative from one of defiance and rule-breaking to one of culture and expression. It wasn't vandalism, it was art. It wasn't a problem, it was an event. That night, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Anya slept without the ghosts. She woke with a sense of purpose that felt like a forgotten friend. She drank her coffee not in a fortress of silence, but in a command center. Colonel Howard's copy of the bylaws lay open on her kitchen table like a military map. Her first move was strategic. She drafted a formal letter to the HOA board, her language as precise and detached as theirs had been. Pursuant to Bylaw Section 12, Clause 2, she wrote, "This letter serves as formal notification of a temporary art installation to be displayed at my residence, 14B Juniper Lane. The installation, titled Wall of Memory will be on view for a period not to exceed 90 days. She enclosed a copy for each board member and sent it via certified mail, just as they had done to her. It was a move straight from Howard's playbook. Use the system against itself. Her second move was tactical. She sat down at her computer and designed an invitation. She chose a simple, elegant font on a clean white background. No angry manifestos, no defensive explanations, just the essential information. You are invited to a backyard gallery viewing Wall of Memory, an abstract exploration of experience. Saturday, July 20th, 2:00 p.m., 4:00 p.m., 14B Juniper Lane. Light refreshments will be served. At the bottom, she added a single, poignant line, the one she'd brainstormed with the Colonel. Every color tells a story. Come and listen. She printed 50 copies. With a thumping heart, she walked to the community clubhouse and pinned one squarely in the center of the main bulletin board. She then took a walk around the neighborhood, placing invitations in the mailboxes of her immediate neighbors and a few others Colonel Howard had pointed out as the reasonable ones. Finally, she took a photo of the invitation and posted it to the Maple Creek Neighbors Facebook group. The reaction was immediate. Within an hour, the post had dozens of likes and a flurry of comments. Some were enthusiastic. What a wonderful idea, can't wait. Others were curious. Is this an HOA-sanctioned event? And a few were predictably snide. I hope this art doesn't hurt my property value. Brenda Minn's reaction was not virtual, it was volcanic. She saw the invitation on the bulletin board as a declaration of war. It was a direct, public challenge to her authority and the sanctity of the rules she enforced. To her, this wasn't about art. It was about anarchy. Her counteroffensive was swift. An email blast titled "Important Reminder Regarding Community Bylaws" was sent to every resident in Maple Creek. It didn't mention Anya by name, but the target was clear. It has come to the board's attention that an unsanctioned event is being promoted, Brenda wrote. Residents are reminded that Bylaw Section 7, Clause 4, strictly prohibits unauthorized architectural alterations. Endorsing or participating in events that celebrate bylaw violations is strongly discouraged and reflects poorly on our community as a whole. For Anya, a second certified letter arrived. This one was far more menacing. It acknowledged receipt of her so-called notification, but dismissed it as a frivolous attempt to circumvent established regulations. It stated that the mural was, by any reasonable definition, a permanent architectural change, not a temporary display. The letter threatened immediate legal action, daily compounding fines, and placing a lien on her property if the wall was not painted over by the original deadline, which was now just a few days away. The threat of a lien was terrifying. It felt like they were trying to take her home, her sanctuary. The fear was a cold, coiling thing in her stomach. She almost buckled. She almost went out and bought the desert sand beige. But then she looked at Colonel Howard's worn copy of the bylaws. She looked at the invitation sitting on her counter. She looked out the window at her wall, at the chaos she had wrangled into a form that was hers alone. No, she thought, not this time. No surrender. It was the Facebook post that brought Chloe Chen into the story. Chloe was a young, sharp reporter for the local Evergreen County Chronicle. She was tired of writing stories about town council meetings and ribbon cuttings. She scrolled through the Maple Creek Neighbors group on a slow Tuesday morning, looking for a spark of life, and found a bonfire. She saw Anya's elegant invitation juxtaposed with Brenda's thinly veiled threats in the comments. She saw a classic David versus Goliath story, but with a twist she couldn't quite put her finger on. There was something more here. She found Anya's number and called. "Ms. Sharma? My name is Chloe Chen. I'm a reporter. I saw the post about your art show, and I find it fascinating. I'd love to hear the story behind it." Anya's first instinct was to say no, to retreat back into her fortress. The media was a spotlight, and she had spent years hiding in the shadows. But then she heard the Colonel's voice in her head. "You have to change the terms. This was how you did it. You didn't let Brenda Min define the narrative in angry emails and legal threats. You told your own story in your own words." "Okay," Anya said, her voice steadier than she expected. "When would you like to meet?" Chloe Chen arrived exactly on time, a detail Anya appreciated. She was young, with bright, intelligent eyes and a disarmingly gentle manner. She wasn't the hard-charging, cynical reporter Anya had pictured. She carried a small notebook and a digital recorder, placing them on the coffee table between them. Anya's house was, as always, immaculate. She'd made a pot of tea, the familiar ritual of it, calming her nerves. For the first 10 minutes, the conversation was stilted. Anya gave clipped, cautious answers, her gaze darting around the room, anywhere but at Chloe. She talked about the bylaws, the letters, the fine. She was recounting the facts, but she was withholding the truth. Chloe sensed it. She put down her pen. "Anya," she said softly, changing her approach. "Forget the HOA for a minute. Tell me about the wall. Why did you start painting it?" Anya stared into her teacup. "It's complicated." "The invitation said every color tells a story," Chloe prodded gently. "What story does the red tell?" The red. The question pierced through Anya's defenses. She could see it in her mind's eye, the frantic, slashing strokes on the cinder block, and behind it, another image, the flashing red lights of the ambulance, the color of a medic's trauma pack, the color of blood on sand. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was low and thick with unshed tears. "The red is for urgency," she said. "It's the color of a moment when everything happens too fast. It's the sound of a siren in your heart." Chloe didn't write. She just listened, her eyes full of empathy. "And the black?" "The black is the vortex," Anya whispered, twisting a napkin in her hands. "It's the after, the silence when the noise stops. It's the not knowing. It's the hole that's left behind, the one that tries to pull everything else into it." It was as if a dam had broken. For the next hour, Anya talked. She never mentioned a specific place or a specific battle. She didn't have to. She spoke in a universal language of emotion, translating the raw data of her trauma into metaphor. The deep, bruised purple was the color of waiting, of the long, lonely hours before dawn on a mission, a color of anxiety and brotherhood all at once. The jagged slashes of gray were the shards of memory, sharp and dangerous to the touch. "And the gold?" Chloe had to ask about the gold. Anya looked up, a faint smile touching her lips for the first time. "The gold is for Specialist Miller," she said. "He was this skinny kid from Ohio who told the worst jokes you've ever heard. Just terrible. But He told them at the exact moment you needed to hear one. When the fear was so thick you could taste it, Miller would whisper some awful pun and make you laugh. Just for a second. The gold is for those seconds. The tiny, brilliant moments of grace. They're small, but they're the ones that prove the black doesn't win. By the time Chloe left, Anya felt exhausted but strangely light. She had taken the ghosts that haunted her and introduced them to a stranger, and the stranger hadn't run screaming. She had listened. The days leading up to the exhibition were a tense countdown. The community was divided. Anya received a few anonymous notes of support slipped into her mailbox. One, from a woman who'd lost her son in Afghanistan, simply said, "Thank you." Another morning, she found a small pot of yellow marigolds on her doorstep, but she also felt the chill from others. Neighbors who used to wave now averted their eyes. She saw small groups whispering by the community mailboxes, casting glances towards her house. She had upset the placid surface of Maple Creek, and not everyone was happy about it. Brenda Min, for her part, had escalated to a Cold War. She couldn't legally stop the gathering, but she parked her own car, a large, immaculate white SUV, directly across the street from Anya's house on the morning of the exhibition, a silent, intimidating sentinel. Colonel Howard, however, was in his element. He was a one-man logistics and morale officer. He'd gone to the local VFW post and spread the word. He'd borrowed a large gas grill from another neighbor. "Every good operation needs a hot meal," he declared, wheeling it into Anya's backyard. "We'll feed them hot dogs. Even the most skeptical soul can't stay mad while eating a free hot dog." On Saturday morning, Anya stood at her kitchen window, looking out at her backyard. The colonel was setting up folding chairs. The grill stood ready, and the wall, her wall, seemed to hum with a nervous energy all its own. It was a maelstrom of color, a map of her soul, laid bare for all to see. In a few hours, the world would be walking through her gate. They would stand before her pain and her hope, her darkness and her tiny flecks of gold. She was terrified, and for the first time in a very long time, she felt truly, vibrantly alive. At 2:00, the first guests trickled in. They were hesitant at first, a mix of curious neighbors, a few stern-faced veterans from the VFW post in their Legion caps, and a handful of people who had only read about it on Facebook. Colonel Howard, wearing a Kiss the Cook apron over a crisp polo shirt, greeted each one with a warm smile and the offer of a hot dog, his easy charm immediately breaking the ice. Anya stood near the wall, her hands clasped behind her back, feeling as exposed as the cinder blocks themselves. She watched as people approached the mural. They would stand, head tilted, trying to make sense of the chaotic swirls of color. She could see the confusion, the skepticism on some faces. Brenda Min remained across the street, a silent, judgmental statue by her white SUV. Then Chloe Chen arrived with a photographer, and her presence seemed to lend the event a new level of legitimacy. More people began to fill the small yard. The murmur of conversation grew. Anya saw the woman who had left the marigolds on her doorstep give her a small, encouraging smile. She saw a man she recognized from the tense HOA meeting whispering to his wife, pointing not with disapproval, but with dawning understanding at a section of the wall. At 2:30, Colonel Howard gave a loud whistle. "All right, folks, quiet down. Our artist has a few words to say." A hush fell over the yard. All eyes turned to Anya. This was the moment. her heart hammered. She took a deep breath, her gaze sweeping over the crowd and then landing on her wall. She decided not to give a speech. She would give a tour. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice shaking only slightly. "I'm not much of a public speaker. The wall speaks for me." She walked to the far left side, where a deep, brooding purple dominated. "This is where it begins," she said softly. "This is the color of waiting, the color of 4 a.m., when the world is holding its breath and you're not sure what the dawn will bring. It's the color of loneliness, but it's also the color of unity, because you're all waiting together." She moved her hand to a jagged slash of gray that cut through the purple. "And this is the color of memory, not the warm, fuzzy kind, the sharp kind, the kind that splinters and leaves edges that can cut you years later." She walked along the wall, her hand hovering over the canvas. She didn't talk about firefights or convoys. She talked about the feelings they left behind. The chaotic black was the deafening silence after a bang. The angry red was the color of helplessness and rage. Then she stopped at a small, almost hidden section where a few brilliant flecks of gold were splashed against the overwhelming black. "And this," she said, her voice catching, "this is the most important part. This is gold. It's for a friend's terrible joke in a moment of fear. It's the color of a shared cigarette under a sky full of unfamiliar stars. It's the taste of lukewarm coffee that feels like the best thing you've ever had. It's for the small moments of grace that prove that darkness doesn't get to have the final word." She paused, looking out at the faces in her yard. "This wall isn't an attack on our community's property values. It's my attempt to map a journey back home. It's me trying to learn to live with my ghosts instead of letting them win." The yard was utterly silent. An older veteran in a VFW cap slowly took it off and held it over his heart. The man who had whispered to his wife was now holding her hand, his eyes misty. Chloe Chen was scribbling furiously in her notebook, but the photographer had lowered his camera, his lens forgotten. They weren't seeing a violation of bylaws anymore. They were seeing a story of survival. The emergency HOA board meeting was standing room only. Veterans in uniform lined the walls. Local reporters jostled for space. Brenda Min, rigid in her signature blazer, sat at the head of the table with the tight-lipped poise of someone who'd lost the room before she spoke. Colonel Howard stepped forward, cleared his throat, and placed a stack of signed petitions on the table with a satisfying thump. 72% of homeowners disagree with the board's decision, he announced. They stand with Ms. Sharma, and they stand with every veteran who has ever fought for freedom, only to come home and be told their healing is an eyesore. When Brenda tried to object, a retired Navy man raised his voice. "Enough with the rules, Brenda. This ain't about beige paint. This is about being human." The vote was swift. The fine was rescinded. Anya was granted a permanent exemption, and in a rare unanimous decision, Brenda Min was removed as HOA president. No resignation, no grace, just a vote, a box packed with her files, and silence as she walked out under the weight of her own rules. 2 weeks later, on a breezy Saturday morning, the neighborhood gathered again, this time not in protest, but in celebration. The Veterans Memorial Garden opened with a ribbon cutting led by the youngest kid on Juniper Lane and the oldest veteran on the block. At its center stood a new mural, Anya's design, brought to life by the hands of neighborhood children, each stroke a thank you in color. Hot dogs sizzled on the Colonel's borrowed grill. Laughter echoed. Neighbors who had never spoken shared stories and coffee. Anya stood quietly at the edge, a soft smile on her face, watching it all unfold. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't fighting to belong. She already did.